Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Hope the weekend went well. Sub-Saharan Africa, I wrote a piece, not the latest one, but the previous one, where I said we're in the end game now. It might be tomorrow, it might be months away, but make no mistake, it's the end game in Harare, in Khartoum and Kinshasa, probably in that order. And the Africa Confidential is saying the end games in Harare and Khartoum are likely to play out with little outside intervention, which is not going to be helpful. Interesting article they've written, Africa in 2019, the youngest continent fights back. There are clear parallels between the wave of protests demanding radical change across Africa this month, with the early days of the North African revolt in 2011 known as the Arab Spring. In most cases, those protests had brought together activists outside traditional party and civic structures, mostly under 30. The protesters were angry and brave, using digital technology as an organizational tool. They were taking on some of the world's most ruthless security states. That is true for the current protests against economic devastation in Sudan and Zimbabwe, as well as misrule in Congo, Kinshasa, and Uganda. And as the anger of the youth grows in Tanzania and Zambia, the grip of their security forces will be tested too. For today's dissenters, there are some harsh lessons from the 2011 wave. Most of the bright hopes of those determined protests in 2011 in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and the milder ones in Algeria and Morocco were snuffed out within a year. After regime change, Egypt reverted to ultra-authoritarianism, and Libya is being ripped apart by rival militias. In 2019, as in 2011, the spark for revolution has been anger at weak and badly managed economies run for the benefit of vested interests in business and the military. The free market mantra has little relevance in the many African regimes where public assets have been taken over by local and foreign private companies, either covertly or in some rigged privatization processes. This is the background to the disputed elections in Congo-Kinshasa, whose official results could allow outgoing President Joseph Kabila and his allies to rule by proxy and maintain a restless grip on the biggest reserves of cobalt. That helps to explain strong support from China and Russia for Kabila's negotiated election victory, with Félix Tshisekedi the more pliable of the two opposition frontrunners. It explains the lukewarm backing for fair and transparent elections by the European Union and the United States, feeling threatened by Beijing and Moscow's support for autocrats. Western governments are reluctant to make new enemies in Africa. That is another brutal lesson for young dissidents in Africa. For regimes that slaughter their own people, the risk of sanctions is diminishing. On top of that leaching away of national resources, Africa's economy is still projected to grow on average by 4% a year by the African Development Bank's optimistic statisticians. We'll have to navigate a downturn in the global economy. Sudan and Zimbabwe, it was the combination of state-imposed price hikes, worsening inflation, currency crisis, rampant corruption, and a political security cabal operating with impunity that led to open revolt. The endgames in Harare and Khartoum are likely to play out with little outside intervention. That took me back to the famous refrain in the streets of Tunis, "We're not afraid, we're not afraid. We are afraid only of God." That's the tipping point moment. That was in Tunis after the self-immolation of Mohamed Bouazizi on the 17th of December 2010, which became a catalyst for the Tunisian revolution. I also said that there is a correlation between high inflation, that's bread prices, and revolutionary conditions. 7th of January, I wrote a piece, Why the DR Congo Delayed Election Results. Gathara, who's a Kenyan cartoonist, has written in the Financial Times, electoral fraud and fake democracies are a global problem. International embrace of suspect election results in the DR Congo and the standoff in Venezuela between its two presidents are signs of the demise of elections as expressions of the will of the people. Elections have long been regarded as signifiers of democracy in the way people select their leaders, but their results today bear less and less relation to how people actually voted. The consternation expressed over allegations of Russian meddling in Western voting sounds hollow when juxtaposed with the hypocritical stances the West has taken on other elections, particularly in Africa. The priority is not that elections deliver the will of the people, but that they deliver stability. Despite voicing doubts over the result, the EU and US have accepted Mr. Tshisekedi and called on him to be a unifier. South African President Ramaphosa takes the cake, urging Congolese stakeholders to accept the outcome of the court and move on to consolidate democracy and preserve peace, stability, and security. Think about that. The Congolese are being asked to accept a fraudulent election result in order to consolidate democracy. The obvious question is whether there still is democracy left to consolidate. So a really hard-hitting article there. And he concludes by saying, there is no democracy to preserve. Rather than expressing the people's will, elections have become arenas for elite contestation for power and resources. The people only exist to fill the seats, which is why in our fake democracies the ballot box changes little, and why, while elections clearly matter, votes increasingly do not. Which takes me back to something I wrote on the 7th of January when I said it's not the people who vote that count, it's the people who count the votes. Tshisekedi is seen sitting beside outgoing President Kabila during his swearing in on Thursday. Kobo 3, we know what happened here. Joseph pilfered the winning votes for Félix, and in turn Félix introduced Joseph to his barber. Kabila no longer has a beard. Fat Cheese Flak Jacket Flap had me thinking about Morsi's first speech in Tahrir Square. He pushed aside his bodyguards to reveal he wasn't wearing any body armor. I have nothing to protect me from any bullets, he said. I fear God, and after that I fear only you. There was a heavy police presence in Al Kalakala, a suburb of Khartoum, that's from Yusra El Bajia. And that, of course, remains very fragile as well, notwithstanding a lot of cash being thrown at Bashir. President Magufuli is stifling liberties, but investment confidence is crashing and resource nationalism is yielding few benefits, Africa Confidential. 2nd of January, I said in Tanzania, investors are having to price in a Magufuli haircut. President Abdelaziz Bouteflika looks certain to stand again. Maybe not being possible, as in physically. Sick, isolated, and out of ideas, he is a cipher for a political system that is out of time. South African all shares up 2.49% this year. Dollar versus rand, the rand's firming to the top of the range, 13.60.63. Egyptian pound, look at how stable this has been. You can argue with El-Sisi on many things, but on the economy, he took all the right decisions. Nigerian all share minus 0.01% year to date, but a lot of drama with the decapitation of the Chief Justice. Ghana Stock Exchange is down 2.64% year to date.